There is a moment in the 2019 Lion King where Mufasa dies and Simba finds the body. He noses at his father's shoulder. Nothing happens. He noses again. His face does not move, because a real lion's face cannot move that way. No muscles built for it. The animators building this cub knew that going in. 25 years earlier, the same scene ran through a hand-drawn cub, whose eyes went huge and wet, whose whole small body folded in on itself, and audiences left that theater unable to talk for a minute. The 2019 version has better fur than anything ever put on film before it. It could not do the one thing the cheaper, cruder original did without trying. That part alone is strange. Disney did not lose money on this film. The Lion King made $1.6 billion, one of the biggest hauls in the studio's history. Disney kept returning to the same broad strategy 4 more times before it, with Cinderella, The Jungle Book, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. Each one adapted a little differently, and every one of those made a fortune too. Then, a decade later, the same studio spent $270 million on Snow White, and grossed just $205 million worldwide. Spent another $250 million on Moana, and weeks into release, still hadn't cleared half of what it needed just to break even. The same company kept running the same broad strategy and landed 2 completely different outcomes. Plenty of these remakes are not failing financially. The strategy itself is not broken across the board. What's strange is how inconsistent the outcome gets. The same studio, running the same formula off the same shelf of animated classics, keeps landing either a billion-dollar hit or a historic write-down. And nothing about the pitch tells you in advance which one you're going to get. There's a reason for that, and it shows up the moment you put Mufasa's 2 faces side by side. Every choice that made these movies look more real cost them something the cartoons never had to pay for. The films that paid the least of it are the ones still making money. Call it the Realism Tax. This is the story of who paid it, who didn't, and what it actually bought. Hey, I'm Mac. Welcome to Mackinflix. Go back to 2010, and none of this exists yet as a plan. Disney had tried live-action versions of its cartoons before. Small and occasional. Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book in 1994. 101 Dalmatians 2 years later, mostly remembered now for Glenn Close deciding Cruella de Vil should be a fashion crime scene. Neither one turned into a strategy. They were just movies. Then Tim Burton made Alice in Wonderland. It landed in March 2010, riding the 3D wave Avatar had just proven people would pay extra for, with Johnny Depp near the height of his box office pull. It crossed $1 billion worldwide. Alice was 3 things landing on top of each other at the same time: Burton's gothic eye, Depp at his peak, and a 3D ticket surcharge that wouldn't last. Disney's finance team did the math anyway, and read the result as a formula. Sean Bailey, named president of the studio's motion picture production arm that same year, spent the next several seasons proving the blueprint worked, whether or not it was ever really there. Cinderella came first in that run, in 2015, directed by Kenneth Branagh, with almost none of the irony you'd expect from a modern remake, just a straight, lavish retelling that made $543 million and pulled an 84% from critics. A year later, Jon Favreau's Jungle Book set a new bar for what CGI environments could carry: $966 million worldwide, a 94% score, and the rare remake that many critics considered an improvement on the cartoon. Then came the real peak. Beauty and the Beast crossed $1.26 billion in 2017. Aladdin made $1.05 billion in 2019. The Lion King, that same year, made $1.65 billion and briefly held the record for the highest-grossing animated film ever made, a strange distinction for a movie built almost entirely out of photoreal CGI. None of that reads like a studio in trouble. Between 2015 and 2019, Disney turned its animated back catalog into one of the most reliable moneymakers in the industry, and the audience showing up for it made sense on paper. Millennials raised on the Disney Renaissance, now adults with kids of their own, buying tickets to watch the cartoons they grew up with rebuilt to look, for a few years, genuinely miraculous. Look a little closer at those same golden years, and you can already hear the first bill coming due. Before getting into what that decision cost, it's worth asking why realism looked like the answer in the first place. Hollywood has treated live action as the grown-up version of a story for about as long as it's been making movies. Animation gets pitched, inside the industry, as the format you graduate out of once you can afford real actors and real cameras. Nobody at Disney sat in a room and decided to make these characters worse. They decided photorealism was progress, following an assumption that's been running under the business for decades. Real is serious, drawn is for kids, and a technology that can finally erase the line between the two must be worth using. The tax bill starts there, in a belief that never got tested, not in any single decision anyone can point to. Mufasa's face isn't the only one that stopped working. Scar's menace in the cartoon leans hard on that sneer, on top of Jeremy Irons' voice and the staging around him. Real lions don't produce the exaggerated eyebrow raises and lip shapes Disney's animators gave Scar, so the photoreal version can only growl, and a growl alone doesn't read as villainy the way a raised eyebrow did. That's not a mystery once you know where to look. In 1981, two of Disney's own veteran animators, Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, published a book called The Illusion of Life, laying out 12 principles that every animated feature since has leaned on. Principles like exaggeration and squash and stretch matter most here. A drawn face or body deforming past what's biologically possible to sell weight, impact, or feeling. The same idea behind Simba's whole face stretching in disgust the first time he tastes a bug in the original film. That's pure exaggeration, built to run in the opposite direction from anything you'd call lifelike. And it's also the entire visual language a hand-drawn villain uses to read as threatening, without moving a single muscle you'd recognize on an actual big cat. Sneering was never a lion behavior to begin with. It was a drawing behavior, borrowed for 30 seconds to make a cartoon feel dangerous. And there's no version of a real animal's face that can do the same job. If you watched the 2019 Lion King and came away feeling like something about it was technically stunning and somehow flat at the same time, you weren't imagining that. The fur is real. The movement is real. The one thing missing is the exact tool the original film used to make you feel anything. And no camera team on Earth could put it back once the decision got made to build these animals to look real, instead of to look expressive. I remember exactly what pulled me toward this film when it came out. It was the fur, honestly, and the water, and the way light moved through the grass like something a camera actually shot, instead of something a computer built frame by frame. I remember being genuinely impressed by the technology while sitting in that theater, and also feeling nothing at all when Mufasa died. Both of those were true in the same 2 hours, and it took me a while to understand why. The same tax got collected somewhere you'd never think to look: the soundtrack. Beauty and the Beast, 2017, cast Emma Watson as Belle, an actor with real range and no formal singing background, then leaned hard on pitch correction software to get her voice through the musical numbers. Used carefully, that kind of correction is invisible. Used the way it got used here, it strips out the breath and the natural wobble that make a voice sound like it's coming from a person. Critics picked it apart immediately in the opening number, the software audibly fighting the vocal take underneath it. Paige O'Hara's 1991 Belle was warm and a little rough at the edges, the way real singing is. The 2017 Belle came out technically correct and quietly synthetic. Same trade, different department. The eyes lost expression to buy realism. The ears lost imperfection to buy polish. Nobody in either case set out to make something worse. They set out to fix a problem the cartoon never had. The films kept getting more real and kept quietly losing the thing that made the cartoons work in the first place. And for years, the box office was loud enough that nobody much noticed the trade happening underneath it. A face that can't emote creates a problem nobody in the writing room signed up to solve. How do you carry an audience through a story when half your emotional toolkit just got removed? The answer, across almost every one of these scripts, was to make the words do the work the face used to do. More explanation, more backstory, more lines spelling out feelings the cartoon let a raised eyebrow handle in half a second. None of this happened in a vacuum. A longer runtime also means more minutes to justify a premium ticket, and a new song gives the marketing campaign something fresh to sell, incentives that had nothing to do with any missing facial expression. Those pressures were real, and they likely made the additions easier to greenlight. But watch where the extra material actually lands in each script, and it keeps showing up in the same place, covering for a feeling the face used to carry on its own. Watch what happens to Beauty and the Beast's plot holes. In the 1991 film, nobody in the nearby village seems to know a giant cursed castle sits down the road, and nobody asks why a prince cursed at 11 has to break the spell by his 21st birthday. Fairy tale logic doesn't need those answered. The 2017 script answers them anyway. The The enchantress erased the whole village's memory, locked everyone in a decade-long loop, and aged the prince up in the prologue so the math works. It's exposition a fairy tale never needed, spent explaining away a plot hole that only became visible because a live-action camera made the world literal enough to notice one. The same instinct shows up as added backstory that never touches the plot. Belle gets rewritten as an inventor who builds a donkey-powered washing machine early in the 2017 film, and never uses that skill again, not to escape, not to help during the final siege on the castle. Screenwriters call this a setup without a payoff, information planted early that a well-built script is supposed to cash in later, sitting there unused because the trait existed to round out a character on the page, not to change what happens on screen. Mulan pays the cost hardest. In 1998, she's clumsy and unremarkable, fails through most of her training, and wins at the end because she outthinks everyone in the room. The 2020 version gives her magical chi from childhood, meaning she's already the best fighter in the story before training even starts. It reads like an upgrade. It removes the one thing that made the original arc work, a character who has to become good at something, filmed by a story that no longer needs her to struggle to get there. The Little Mermaid 2023 does something similar from the opposite direction. Ariel forgets, through a spell, that she needs a kiss to stay human, which sounds like it raises the stakes and instead removes her ability to pursue the thing she wanted, turning a character who made a reckless deal and has to live with it into someone waiting around for her own memory to come back. Every one of these page problems is a face problem wearing a screenplay's clothes. Whatever the online discourse around any one of these films turns into, the mechanism underneath is a screenwriting problem with a plain name. A trait or an arc gets added to round a character out, and the plot never asks anything of it. That costs runtime. Long stretches of exposition and backstory that would have been a raised eyebrow in 1994 now take 3 or 4 extra minutes of dialogue in 2017, 2019, 2023. Runtime by itself isn't the issue. Plenty of good films earn an extra 90 minutes. The issue is when the extra minutes don't move anything, when they're there to fill time instead of change the story, which is exactly what's happening in each example above. Add that up across a whole film, and you get the second half of the tax bill. These movies got long. Beauty and the Beast runs 129 minutes against the animated original's 84. The Little Mermaid runs 135 against 83. That's the page trying to buy back what the face lost. One extra scene at a time. And every extra scene costs money to shoot, light, and score. Bigger budgets change the math a studio has to run before it greenlights anything. The rule of thumb? A film needs to clear roughly 2.5 times its production budget worldwide just to break even, once marketing and the theater's own cut get factored in. For years, the audience for these films spanned the globe wide enough to hit that number. Then, 2 of the biggest pieces of it disappeared inside the same decade. China, which had quietly padded out earlier remakes like The Jungle Book, gave The Little Mermaid under $5 million in 2023. And the scarcity that used to make a remake feel like an event vanished the moment Disney Plus launched in 2019 and put most of the catalog online for $10 a month. Why buy a ticket for a live-action Little Mermaid when the better, cheaper animated one streams at home? Follow the chain all the way through. The face loses its expression. The page adds words to cover for it. The extra words cost runtime. The runtime costs money. The money needs a global audience that stopped fully showing up. And the scarcity that used to protect the whole business model got switched off from inside the same company. On purpose. To build a streaming service. Nobody made one bad decision. They made a dozen reasonable ones, each solving the problem the last one created, and every solution came with its own bill attached. So, if you've made it this far, hitting like helps a video like this find more people, and I appreciate it. If the Realism Tax explains all of this, it runs straight into a problem. Cinderella made $543 million. The Jungle Book made $966 million. Mufasa the Lion King in 2024 pulled in $722 million worldwide, despite weak pre-release tracking, off a story few had actually asked for. And Lilo and Stitch in 2025 crossed $1 billion and became the highest-grossing live-action animated hybrid ever made. If realism is the thing quietly killing these movies, none of that should have happened. It happened because these films paid a smaller version of the same bill, or found a way around paying it at all. Start with Stitch. The character never went photoreal. Dean Fleischer Camp, directing the 2025 remake, kept Stitch as a stylized CGI creation dropped into a live-action Hawaii, rather than trying to build him out of anything resembling a real animal's anatomy. His ears still move like a cartoon's ears. His face still stretches past what any real creature's face could do. The film paid almost none of the face tax, because it never agreed to the trade in the first place. Then there's the timing. Lilo and Stitch arrived 23 years after the 2002 original, long enough that the audience buying tickets in 2025 skewed toward people who grew up with the film, rather than people who'd seen it a decade ago and were already tired of it. Cinderella and the 2016 Jungle Book both leaned into genuine reinterpretation instead of a scene-for-scene copy. Branagh expanded the stepmother and the prince into real characters, giving them motives the 1950 film never bothered with. And Favreau built an entire photoreal jungle that many critics considered an improvement on the cartoon in its own right. These films paid less of the page tax, too, because they weren't spending their runtime explaining away plot holes nobody asked about. They were telling a version of the story that had a reason to exist beyond looking expensive. Line those up against Snow White and Moana, and the pattern holds from the other direction. Full photorealism, a nearly identical plot to the original, and, in Moana's case, barely any gap in time for nostalgia to rebuild itself. Every ingredient the successful remakes avoided, all in one film. I want to be honest about where I'm coming from here, because it matters for how much you should trust any of this. I still watch animated films and shows as an adult, still watch anime regularly. None of what's in this video comes from a place of thinking animation is a lesser format that live action naturally improves on. If anything, the opposite. The more I've watched these remakes fail to do what their cartoons did with a fraction of the budget, the more convinced I've gotten that animation was never the problem being solved here. Sean Bailey ran this whole era for 14 years and stepped down as president of Walt Disney Studios motion picture production in February 2024, right as the losses on Haunted Mansion and The Little Mermaid were still fresh and Snow White was already heading toward its own disaster. His replacement, David Greenbaum, came over from Searchlight Pictures, where the job had been backing smaller, cheaper films that needed to earn their existence on craft rather than brand recognition alone. Greenbaum's pitch for the job, by most accounts, came down to a single question he wanted applied to every future project. Does this movie need to exist? It's a different filter than the one that greenlit a decade of remakes on the strength of brand recognition alone, and it started showing up in decisions almost immediately. Disney quietly shelved its in-development Tangled remake in early 2025. Bob Iger told investors the studio had already killed several other projects that weren't strong enough to justify the budget. At the same time, Disney leaned back into what the remakes had been trying to substitute for all along. Inside Out 2 became the highest-grossing animated film ever made. Toy Story 5 has already crossed $1 billion worldwide, while the live-action remake Next Door struggled to clear a quarter of its budget back. Disney's own SEC filings from that stretch credited Inside Out 2 by name for a jump of over $800 million in the entertainment segment's operating income in a single quarter. The studio spent a decade paying to make its cartoons look real. It's now spending its recovery on the fact that they never needed to. Go back to Mufasa's death scene one more time. The 2019 cub with the face that can't move. The 1994 cub with the face that could do anything the animators needed it to. Same script, same blocking. 25 years and hundreds of millions of dollars apart, and only one of them made you feel the loss. Then picture Stitch. Still fuzzy, still absurd, built out of nothing that looks like any animal that has ever existed, dropped into a real Hawaii next to real actors, and somehow the only one of the three who still gets to make a face. That's the bill, sitting right there in 3 faces. Disney's own fix for all of this, the thing that's actually working right now, is going back to animation. Inside Out 2, Toy Story 5, the medium that never had to pay this tax in the first place. Except, go watch a recent Pixar movie next to an early one, and something else feels off. A different bill Pixar's been quietly paying for a decade. That's the next video. Why Pixar movies don't feel the same anymore.